In 1934, Boris Gosyrev came to the General Council of Andorra and presented a new constitution and a proposal to crown himself prince. Boris is a very smart man who was very involved in European and Russian aristocracy. He was educated at Lycée Louis le Grand and at Oxford University's Magdalen College, the most prestigious schools in Europe. He was born in a family of Russian nobility and was even in the Dutch royal court before coming to Andorra, except pranked ya. These are all what Boris claimed to the press for positive PR and isn't actually how his life went. He did present a constitution and a proposal to crown himself prince to the Andorran General Council, but his life before that is way more interesting than what he claimed. If you want to know the story of the life of Boris Gosyrev, we'll have to start from the beginning. Boris was born in the 1890s in Lithuania, part of the Russian Empire at the time, in a family of very low nobility. In 1917, he went into political asylum in England, because things were going down back home, and joined the British Army as a translator. Probably. His military career is kind of vague. Since Boris was an immigrant, he found himself having economic issues after the war, so he mostly stayed in hotels in England and eventually started committing check fraud. Despite being caught for this multiple times, the consequences never seemed to be much for Boris, and that's probably because of his friend Oliver Locker-Lampson. Oliver was a friend of Boris made in the military who was at this point a government official with a lot of power. After these incidents, Boris went around Europe learning different languages and doing things. We don't really know exactly what he did. What we do know is that he got a Nansen passport, a stateless passport handed out by the League of Nations, and soon thereafter got a Dutch passport, so we can assume he was in the Netherlands for a lot of that time. Another reason we can assume that is because he was in the General Intelligence and Security Council's list of prominent foreign revolutionaries. The General Intelligence and Security Council is in the Netherlands. He was listed as an international swindler. There is one confirmed case of him swindling for a golden watch in England, so the international swindler makes sense. But how did he become a revolutionary? In 1932, Boris went to Colombia and set up Boris Gosyrev Import-Export Representation. Despite my best efforts, I know nothing about this trade business. Sorry, I can't read Russian or Lithuanian. Anyway, this is probably where he learned and mastered Spanish, a skill he would need in his next and most famous endeavor, trying to become the Prince of the Principality of Andorra. As soon as Boris first got to Andorra, it seems like he was planning on becoming the ruler. The first thing he did was announce his intention to some former government officials and advisors, and was promptly ridiculed. After this, Boris saw himself as exiled, whatever that means, and stayed in La Seu d'Urgell. Right, and got a lot of attention from the press, which led to many, many interviews. And this is when he started lying to the press about his life. I should probably give a brief explanation on how the Andorran government worked at this time. So Andorra has two princes. One is the Bishop of Urgell, and the other is the President of France, previously the King of France. Andorra also has a general council that actually makes the rules. It's like Andorra's Congress. Alright, back to Boris. So Boris introduced to the General Council a new constitution that would change a few things for the small nation. Sadly, the Andorran archives don't have a copy of the constitution, and I couldn't find one anywhere else. Most sources say that the constitution was going to make Andorra more modernized, introduce foreign investments, and become a tax haven, which is actually what Andorra later became. Would you look at that? Now, in exchange for this constitution, Boris wished to be crowned the Prince of Andorra. You might be wondering how he justified this. Although the French monarchy didn't exist anymore, the lineage was still alive. That lineage led to Duke Jean d'Orléans. Boris argued that the Duke still had the rights over the princedom because his family used to have it. Although this at first sounds like a good argument, you realize soon that it falls apart because, the royal family doesn't have the princedom anymore, and everyone knows that. He claimed that he was the Duke's regent, and later confessed that that wasn't the case. Despite the fact that the General Council never agreed to this, Boris also gave himself an official title. From then on, he wished to be called Ahem. Boris I, Prince of the Valleys of Andorra, Count of Orange and Baron of Skosiref, Sovereign of Andorra and Defender of the Faith. What's the faith? What's he defending it from? Your guess is as good as mine. Boris showed off his snazzy new flag and immediately declared war on the Bishop of Urgell. The issue was that he was staying in
La Seu d'Urgell.
Thank you, the same place where the cathedral of the Bishop of Urgell is. And since he was doing so many interviews, the bishop knew exactly in which hotel he was staying at, so he was arrested by Spanish authorities. He was in jail for a few months and then kicked out of Spain. Boris pretty much spent the rest of his adventurous days in a bunch of prisons with brief moments of freedom. First, he got arrested in France for a reason I couldn't find, then in Portugal for not having a residence permit, then he went back to Spain during the Spanish Civil War, and in 1939 found himself in a French labor camp along with anti-Francoists and anti-fascists. So if his ballsiness wasn't enough for you to like him, he was probably an anti-fascist, so that's a thing. He was released with the victory of the Allies and got arrested by Americans, then got arrested by the French in Berlin on December 14th, 1946. Jeez, leave this dude alone. Has he not gone through enough already? Oh, he was arrested for collaborating with Nazis? Then why was he in that French Nazi labor camp? What? Take back what I said about him being anti-fascist. Some stories say that he wandered into Soviet territory someday and, say it with me now, got arrested and sentenced to 25 years in a Siberian work camp. Thankfully, he got released in 1956. Boris lived the rest of his life quietly in Boppard, West Germany, until he died in 1989. Only around 31 years ago when I'm recording this. I did leave out the women in his life in this story since they don't seem to affect his story all too much, but I do think it's important to mention at some point. Boris was apparently a very good-looking and charismatic man who, along with having a French wife, also had many lady friends, including a woman who used to be married to an American millionaire who possibly was a millionaire herself. I'm guessing this is how his adventures were funded. In 1993, Andorra got a new constitution which changed many things, including many ideas that Boris brought up, such as modernization and making Andorra a tax haven. Although Boris may not have impacted the world to the same degree as actual leaders of the time, I do think that his story is interesting and can be taken in many different ways. It can be the tale of a man with ambitions who flew too close to the sun, chasing his dream to become the ruler of a country, or the tale of a smart, charismatic man who overestimates himself, leading to many arrests. I'll leave it to you to make your own conclusions.